we have Brig Oubridge, who is a long-standing and one of the founding members of the Green Party before it was called the Green Party. Thank you, Brig, for offering to do this.
Let me set you straight, first of all, I'm not one of the founding members of the Green Party. There were about a dozen of those who met in a pub in about 1973, I think it was. And it was when the Club of Rome had produced a report on how the world and the economic system weren't sustainable. And the Ecologist magazine had produced a special issue called Blueprint for Survival. And these intellectually types had read that and decided the thing to do, rather than what other people were doing, which was forming things like Greenpeace, was to form a political party. And it wasn't until 1979 that I joined the party, and that was when it had 350 members. It had grown from 12 to 350 over the 6 or 7 years. And they decided that with 350 members, they would put up 50 candidates for Parliament in that year's general election, which was quite a bold move, but it got them a 5-minute broadcast on the television. And so they shot to national prominence. Everyone thought that was quite a boring election. You know, it was just, fed up with Labour, time for the Tories to come back, Margaret Thatcher. For people like me who were fed up with a lot of them and actually saw that the whole thing was unsustainable, for there to be a new party called the Ecology Party that was based on green principles was amazing. And so the membership of the party rocketed over the time of that election and a month or two afterwards, from 350 to 3,500.
Wow.
That was the first big green surge. And at the time, it didn't have that much of a constitution. It had a bit of a constitution that had been written by the chairman of their National Executive Committee at the time, a chap called Jonathan Tyler, who was an academic from Birmingham University. And it was all right as far as it went, and it was adequate for a group of 350 people. And it said that the conference was the supreme body of the party and made all the policy. And people voted in various ways to put people onto this National Executive Committee, which had 13 regional representatives, plus 4 people elected on a postal ballot and 4 people elected from the floor of conference. It actually had places for 3 more people who were MPs or councillors of the party. But at the time, I think they only had 1 parish councillor who was on it but didn't come to meetings. And so in the autumn of 1979, they tried to have a conference, and there were hundreds of new members there who just joined, and the whole thing was totally chaotic because they had no standing orders, they had no order in terms of the conference, and nothing was actually voted through. Everything was trying to be amended from the floor, ad hoc, and nothing actually got passed through the whole conference. So they decided that they would have another policy conference in the spring, and they decided they'd better get some sort of standing orders so that it would actually behave itself and make some progress. And that was my first conference, was the spring conference in 1980, which took place at Manchester University, and I was elected onto the first standing orders committee. They brought in an old Labour chap from Birkenhead, Liverpool, called Rob Andrews. He was a kind of expert on procedure of running meetings and what have you, and he guided us on this standing orders committee through the process of writing the first set of standing orders of the party. I stayed on standing orders committee for 2.5 years from then. In my third year, I was convener of it. And by then I'd already got myself onto what had been the National Executive Committee, but we changed that and made it the Party Council. Started off as the Ecology Party Council, later became the Green Party Council. And the people who'd been the kind of old guard before 1979, some of them felt really energized by the fact that all these new people had come into the party, and others of them felt, oh, their party that they'd been nurturing for the previous 5 or 6 years had suddenly been taken away from them by all these hairy hippies and radical lefties and load of ne'er-do-wells and so on and so forth. And one of the first things that we did was we decided we were having a quasi-leader. And so instead of having one chairperson, a chairman of the National Executive, which is what we'd inherited, we decided in the autumn of 1980, when Jonathan Tyler, who had been the chair, had to stand down, because we had the 3-year rule. You could only be on the party council for 3 years and then you had to have a year off. So he had to come off it, and Jonathan Porritt was really the heir apparent, who was in line to be the next chairman. But we said, no, we're not having that. We're going to have 3 co-chairs so that we don't have a single leader. And that was probably the first big change that all these radicals coming in the 79 election made in the party. Actually, the constitution then worked pretty well. There were a lot of different people on. Some were part of the old guard, some are part of the new influx. Some were more radical, decentralist, grassroots types. Some were more centralist and managerialist. And there was that kind of split between the managerialist tendency and the radical decentralist tendency, which coexisted on the party council and had to find ways of working together, and did. Generally, the managerialists took charge of management committee and the decentralists took charge of internal communications and things. There was a mixture on all the other committees because we organised ourselves into committees. All the people on party council had to be on at least 2 committees, so that there were half a dozen committees of half a dozen people each. And we had meetings that went on for the whole weekend, 4 times a year, of the whole party council. And in that we had meetings of the various committees, and that was where the work got done. Did the work because we didn't have any staff, we didn't have any money, so we didn't have any staff. We started off with our first office and one office manager who was doing the membership administration, basically. A couple of years later, we managed to also having a press officer. But as I say, Jonathan Tyler was, and after that that first year after the 1980, and he went on to a thing called the Appeals Tribunal, which was supposed to hear appeals if the party council actually disciplined anybody, tried to throw anybody out or anything like that. But it never did, so there were never any appeals. So it was a bit of a being on that. And Jonathan Tyler turned his attention to trying to write a new constitution. And he set up a thing called the Party Organisation Working Group and produced a new constitution which would have a smaller directly elected executive with a larger council underneath that, which was supposed to be a representative body, and was able to make policy statements in between conferences instead of conferences. Does it sound familiar? But the radical side of the party, the people who'd come in 79, were quite happy with the constitution the way that it was. This party organisation working group kept bringing its proposals to conference, and they were discussed, and they were voted down, and they were brought back again, and they were discussed again and voted down again, and this went on for most of the 1980s. Meanwhile, the party was doing quite well. It was growing steadily. It went from 3,500 to 6, 7, 8, 9,000. By the end of by 89, it was up to 10,000 members. And in the meantime, there had been this thing called the SDP, which was a breakaway thing from the Labour Party. People might remember it if they're as old as me. And they were saying they were going to break the mould of British politics. And they ended up in an alliance with the Liberals, the Liberal Party. And then after the 87 election, the Liberals decided to take them over and merge and become the Liberal Democrats. But that actually turned into a split because David Owen, who was leader of the SDP, didn't want to join. And so they looked like a split party that was coming apart at the seams. And it was in 89 when we had the first directly elected European Parliament elections. And the Green Party did really well and got 12% of the vote. It's still our biggest vote that we've ever got in a national election. But it wasn't under proportional representation, so we didn't get any seats. But we really came to the fore then. But all this time, this long thing with party organisation working group had been going on and on and on, and they kept on getting referred back or coming to conference and not getting the 2/3 majority that they needed to change the constitution. They even had, and this might sound familiar, a special constitutional conference outside of the usual run of conferences in order to try and get their new constitution pushed through. And they actually seemed to succeed for a short while. They had this conference in Coventry in, I think it was about 1988. And it passed, except that all the decentralists had boycotted the conference, so it wasn't quorate. And so the whole thing was ruled out of order in the end. So 1989, we did really well in the European elections, and by that time, we'd instituted a new position, because in the 87 election, those who were the co-chairs of party council found it was a bit much doing the job of being co-chair of party council and being the main spokespeople for the party, certainly during a general election. So we decided to have, from that point on, 2 principal speakers for the party. And the idea was that they wouldn't be part of the party council, they wouldn't have an executive responsibility, they would just be there to spout party policy and be media spokespeople. And one of them at that time was Sarah Parkin. Sarah Parkin had been part of the old guard before 79. She was a mate of Jonathan Tyler's and Jonathan Porritt's and so on, part of that crowd. But she lived in France. She lived in Lyon because her husband worked for the World Health Organization, and that was where he was based. But it meant that she was kind of semi-detached from the rest of the party, but it also meant that she was on the continent at a time when there was no Channel Tunnel. So it was a lot easier for her to get to European Greens meetings than it was for anyone who had to come from Britain, and a lot cheaper as well. So she ended up as our main liaison person with the European Greens. And so it seemed a very good idea for her to be principal spokesperson during the European elections. And so the media, who never could understand why we didn't have a leader, hailed her as being the new leader of the Greens. But unfortunately, after that, everything fell apart, because although our membership had gone up from just over 10,000 to nearly 20,000 in the course of 1989, those people had joined thinking, oh, well, they're kind of like the Liberal Party. And it took them a year or so to find out that no, we weren't. We were somewhat more radical. And about 2/3 of them didn't renew their membership. And so the party was immediately in a never known membership to go down, and had planned on the basis of all that membership money carrying on coming in. Can people still hear me all right? Can you wave if you can still hear me all right? Because my internet connection keeps telling me it's a bit dodgy. Okay, good. You can stop waving now, Alan. So that was also the time that Margaret Thatcher was introducing the poll tax, which you'll remember was introduced first in Scotland. And the Scots didn't. And the Green Party didn't like it. We actually passed motions at our conference saying that instead of registering for the poll tax as everyone was supposed to, we should all register in the name of Wat Tyler, who of course was the rebel who led the revolt against the previous poll tax in the time of Richard II. So the Green Party was decidedly against the poll tax and in favour of non-cooperation and non-payment and non-registration and so on. But Sarah Parkin, although she lived in Lyon, had kept a holiday home in Scotland. And she came out and told everyone they ought to be paying their poll tax, which projected a split image of the Green Party, that particularly since the the other principal speaker, because we had two, one male and one female, the other principal speaker at the time was a chap who hadn't been in the party long, but he worked for the BBC. He read out the football results on a Saturday afternoon, and he introduced the snooker. He was an ex-goalkeeper by the name of David Icke. And that was before he went totally balmy. And he was the one who stuck to the party line and refused to pay his poll tax and got taken to court. So, of course, that helped even more to give us a split image. It totally ruined Sarah Parkin's cred with the activists in the party who were all refusing to pay and being taken to court. It also ruined David Icke's career at the BBC because he got sacked for being too political, and then had a bit of a nervous breakdown and turned into a mad new age guru who told everybody that the royal family were lizards from outer shape-shifting lizards from outer space. So he went totally balmy. Sarah Parkin, the activists all hated her. But Peter Barnett said he refused and the bailiffs came knocking. I managed to get the whole of Teepee Valley off it by saying we didn't have houses. Anyway, it was immediately after that that this party organisation working group, PALG, rebranded itself. We had an advertising executive on the party council at the time called Liz Crosby, and she masterminded this rebranding of PALG as Green 2000. And they direct mail shots to all the members, telling them how holding it back, and with this new constitution, everything would be wonderful, and we'd have a whole raft of Green MPs by the year 2000, and that's why they were calling themselves Green 2000. And all to do to make it happen was to send in their membership cards so that Green 2000 could wield lots of proxy votes at the next conference and get their new constitution through. And so at the 1999 conference, what happened was there was this debate on the Green 2000 constitution, which was basically the same one that PALG had been bringing forward for years. As usual, it didn't get a majority of or a 2/3 majority of the members who were actually there. But then someone was able to produce 350 proxy votes out of their back pocket and get it pushed through. And that's how we got the constitution that we got at the moment, with the Green Party Executive and GPRC as separate bodies. With GPEX having all the power and control of all the money, and GPRC looking around for what job it can do, writing lots of strategy papers that no one takes any notice of, and using the only power that it was given, which was disciplinary powers to keep disciplining people. And we've been stuck with that constitution for the last 30 years. The big thing that did was, well, it totally crippled the party. The the activists refused to take part in the ballot for the first Green Party executive. The Green 2000 group put forward their own slate for all the positions, and they were all elected unopposed. Half of them had never been in office at national level in the party before, had no idea what they were supposed to do. They were all elected to individual positions, which replaced the committees that we had on the previous party council. So instead of people being in a committee of half a dozen people, at least half of whom had been on that committee before and knew what the job was and how it was supposed to go, the people who were elected to GPEX were on their own, trying to do 6 people's work on their own and with no idea what they were supposed to do. And half of them dropped out within 9 months. Because of a sort of changeover period between the autumn conference, New Year, the new GPEX only lasted 9 months from 1st of January through till autumn conference. But nevertheless, half of them had dropped out before the end of that 9 months. And most of the rest of them, I think there were only 1 or 2 who stayed on for the following year, and the decentralists had to come back in and rescue the party, because it was at that point it was falling apart, partly because it had lost a third of its membership, including lots of the old activists who'd been with it through the 80s, who said, no, this is the last straw, we're not standing for this, and had either left the party or become inactive. And because it had lost all the subscription money, which it had rashly budgeted to keep spending and take on commitments, when the membership had gone up and nearly hit 20,000 in 1989. So we then went into a period of the doldrums in the 1990s. We'd missed the chance of going on a high from having done so well in the European elections in '89 to being seen as the leaders of the poll tax revolt, because we'd been projected as being split on it. So we missed the boat there, and basically we were in the doldrums through the 90s, and it took a long time for us to start recovering and rebuilding again. And it was really only in '97 when the Labour government got back in, and the European Parliament said, we've got to have proper elections by proportional representation, so it's a fair system all over Europe. And we got proportional representation for European elections, that we got our first 2 MEPs in '99, and we were back on the way up again. But it's a real weakness in our constitution that we've still got this executive, which is elected as single positions. You're only allowed to stand for one of those positions. If you don't get it, then you're off. And those people are supposed to be in charge of the whole of that department, doing everything. And they've got no committee and no expertise to back them up. And they become totally dependent on staff now that we've got staff. So the staff are running the party. The coordinators on GPEX who are supposed to be in charge of their departments aren't, because staff will only do what the chief executive tells them they can do. The chief executive talks to the chair of the exec and to the leaders, which is another thing that we didn't used to have and we were dead against having until was when Caroline Lucas became our first leader. And we've now got this, we've basically got two pyramidical structures. We've got the leadership, who get together with the chair of GPEX in a thing called the political committee, which doesn't exist in our constitution, but seems to run GPEX and pull the strings from there. And the other pyramidical structure, which is the staff working under a chief executive who works alongside the chair of GPEX and the political committee and the leadership. And it's actually the staff who are running the party. And we've totally lost demo control of it. And now we've got the whole cycle coming around again with the holistic review and this new constitution that's coming in, they hope. And it's the same old, same old. It's the same bad ideas, only writ larger, because it's going to take, instead of the medium-sized group of GPEX that's supposed to be running the party, there's going to be a much smaller group. There'll be Polcom and there'll be a board. And beneath that, you'll have an even larger group than GPRC, the new council. And there'll be no committees, none of the committees that are now elected by, apart from SOC, there'll be none of the committees that are now elected by conference. And there'll be no committees helping people to do things. Instead, there'll be these task and finish groups, which will be appointed of people who don't know what the job is, don't know what the task is, and will never finish it. Just like the task and finish group that they set up to write a new constitution, never actually managed to do it. So it's the same old, same old. It's the it's time for questions. I think it's time for questions. That's my take on the history of the party. To it, there's a document which I hope you'll be able to get your hands on if you haven't seen it already. And yes, let's have some questions. Someone else needs to talk apart from me.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Brig. I think that's quite an enlightening part of the party that actually most of us were never aware of. And it's actually brought in some very interesting questions. I'll take questions from anybody that actually wants to ask a question.
Well, I would fall into the trap of saying, oh, it was better in the old days, for as long as all sides knew that they had to find a way of coexisting and working by compromise and consensus on the party council. There was 1 year when it didn't work. In 2000 group thought that they could take control of party council and run it on a majoritarian basis, and it didn't work. We've moved on, and it's 30 years since then, and there's backwards. I think we have to, I think it's wrong entirely to think in terms of writing a whole new constitution, because you just create more and you solve that way, and you get something that doesn't hang together and is full of contradictions. And that's all the reasons that SOC have twice ruled holistic review constitution out of order when it's come forward, because it's been badly drafted for so going to be the effect of that, is it idea or not, and can see the result of it afterwards and see whether it's worked or not. So it has to be a gradual process. I think the first job is to get rid of this holistic review idea of, oh, it'll all be more efficient, centralize it in fewer hands, because then we'll get rid of all the troublemakers. And that the voluntary organizations and voluntary work organizations work by empowerment. They depend on people who give their efforts, and you only get that if you empower the people, not if you try and rule over them.
Very interesting response, Brig.
And the first thing I think we've got to do is draw people's attention to the Young Greens budget that they've got, which is £10,000 to the attention of the party, because committees elected by conference, like campaigns committee, in fact the campaigns coordinator and the whole department has, to my knowledge, had a zero budget for the past 3 years at least, 4 years at least, while the Young Greens have been getting 10 grand a year plus a worker. I would agree that the Young Greens places on GPEX need taken away. They need putting on GPRC, and they should be put on GPRC on an equal representational basis with Green Party women, with Green seniors, and there are other places on GPEX which I think ought to go as well, and it ought to be stripped back to the kind of group of coordinators who were running, who took over from the committees that the old GPC had before the change in 91-2. And those coordinators ought to be made to work with and through committees, so that people can come up through the committees and learn the jobs before they end up being coordinators, because that's where the continuity lies, and the learning of the jobs and the efficient performing of them. And it involves a group of people. When you involve a group of people, you make better decisions.
My question is on the committees that have been created by GPEX, obviously GPEX and the committees that have been created by GPRC. What standing do they have? And really, why should we actually have all these extra committees just trying to actually duplicate the same work? So you'd find actually a committee that's actually dealing with E&D. Then you also have the E&D committee being run, separately. What's the point of actually having committees that are doing the same thing but in different platforms? My assumption would be GPEX committee and GPRC committees would actually be falling under what I would decide actually as our central body is actually the conference, isn't it? Conference is actually the highest body in the party.
Yeah.
So why are we actually having other parts of the party actually creating committees that seem to actually really bypass what those committees that have been elected by the conference?
The way that it started out it was one body, and it was about 24 people altogether, and that's actually the same size as the cabinet, because it's the number of people you can get around in a room and they can all speak without microphones and interact in an intimate way. There's actually an organic thing about having of that size, as a kind of maximum size. It's the maximum size that works without having to run it like a conference. But being divided up into committees. There was a management committee, political committee, elections committee, international committee, internal communication, external communications, and conferences, half a dozen committees. When we lost those committees, the Green 2000 Constitution, then conference started creating new committees. So we had a campaigns committee that was elected by conference, and we got a policy development committee that was elected by conference, and we got a conferences committee elected by conference. So we've got all these committees that they're given no budget, and they're orphan kind of committees. But it was the party at the grassroots trying to get back the kind of committee structure that had been destroyed by the creation of GPEX and putting all the power in the hands of individual coordinators. But it gave them the power, but it didn't actually give them the capacity to do the job.
Quite interesting information, because if the committees were actually working much better to achieve what the party needed, then clearly we didn't need any extra, like GPEX or GPRC. You just needed less and functioning committees that would actually do everything. Probably even more democratic in the way that they are elected. And they don't actually last as long as these other kind of emanations that have actually transpired now that seem to actually be lasting. So that is actually quite an interesting one.
Going back to what happened in 1979, when there was the first big surge of new members coming in. At that time we had bugger all policy, and the new members wanted to make the policy, and we didn't have the whole huge compendium that's now the policies for a sustainable society. All we had was an election manifesto with a little thin thing from the 1979 election. And so the first task of the party in the 1980s was forming lots and lots of policy. So there were lots of policy working groups formed from conference. They produced policy papers, and everything was sent to all the members of the party. We had a thing called Eco News, which was published 4 times a year. It went to every member, and the whole of the conference agendas, including all the discussion papers, were published in that. I mean, it's much easier in a way now because we've got the internet. Everything had to be on paper in those days. Postage was a lot cheaper. Everything went to all the members. So all the local parties, or most of them, because they were getting fed this stuff, were actually discussing it in their local parties, what was coming up for the next conference, what we're going to do about the land policy. Well, land policy was a real hot potato, that one. There was I didn't mention this in my paper, but we had conference debates about land policy at night between the two factions. There were the confiscators who wanted to take land off the Duke of Westminster and share it out among the hippies, and the land taxers who thought you could do everything by putting land tax on it. And we had furious battles that went on for conference after conference, and sessions being extended till 10 at night so that we could debate these two rival papers. So there were huge policy debates at that time. But the key to it all was internal communications. And we had Eco News that went to all the members, and that morphed into Green World, which went as a magazine to all the members. And that turned into Green World that was published online and nobody looks at it. And there were a few copies printed for people who subscribed to having printed copies. and then that's all there is something that is stuff online that only geeky people who spend their lives online look at, and it passes most of the membership by. I think one way around it would be to go to having delegate conferences where to go representing your local party. And your local party had a number of representatives depending on how many members it had. Therefore, at least in your local party meetings, you would have to have some idea of what were going to be the issues that delegates were going to say on behalf of your local party. I think that would bring about engagement if there was more information going to members. Now we just treat them like mushrooms, keep them in the dark and feed them bullshit. And that's the way members are treated by the centre nowadays. All we get is emails saying, oh, we're doing one change, and spending all the money on Young Greens, and campaigns committee that wants to do things about climate change hasn't had a budget for 4 years. So it's a con job. There needs to be more information going to the members of what's actually going on. We used to have Green World, it used to have a letters column. People used to be able to write in and criticise what was going on at the centre of the party. And it used to publish their letters. A relevant point is that because of data protection laws, our membership list and our entire online profile and our ability to contact the members online is all controlled through a very few people in party office who work to whatever the chief executive tells them, who works hand in glove with the political committee and the chair of PPEX. And apart from local membership secretaries have access to their own local party membership online, but not to any neighbouring local party. And it's terrible trying to organise things at a county level in Wiltshire, because we've got different local parties and we've got 5 parliamentary constituencies within the county of Wiltshire and 2 more in Swindon, which is a borough on its own. And none of them can talk to all the members. They can only talk to their own members in their own segment. So we get on really well in Salisbury, but I'm having real problems now. I'm standing for Police and Crime Commissioner for Wiltshire in talking to more than 1 or 2 people in the other parties in Wiltshire. We are divided by the technology and by the data protection laws, and control of using it on a mass level is in the hands of the establishment in the office. It's run by the, and it puts out the messages that they want to put out.
Well, what you've just actually outlined is apathy at the party membership level, but that's actually being driven, in my view, by the party structure of how the party is functioning. So, there are people that are benefiting from non-engagement of our membership because they like it that way, because they don't have to do things. They can retain their power. So they don't want the membership to actually be active. So we have to do something to bring, democracy back, hence the Democracy Cafe. Plugging the Democracy Cafe.
I don't believe any other party is going to carry the green torch for us. Yeah, I've been in here too long to go anywhere else. I do feel repeatedly like giving up and just going down the allotment. I know that if I just give up and go down my allotment, it's going to hell in a handcart anyway, but I can't not feel that I'm doing something to try and stop it.
Fantastic. Well, that's actually quite good. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe we could actually just close then and thank to Brig for making this happen, because it's actually just trying to get people ready for the upcoming conference of the Constitution, that ensures that we are aware what's actually happening, what is actually involved in the Constitution that's new, and what to expect of it, and how to actually vote. Because I think if people actually have an understanding, they will probably make the better decisions. But if you don't know and somebody's telling you what's in the Constitution, it's always quite an interesting one, because they would tell you what they want you to know and tell you how fantastic the new structure will be, because they want it actually all centralized. So it'd actually be quite interesting. So we'll try and put those together and have more people coming in. So we'll send some invites as soon as possible, so that then there's lots of people that are coming in and actually have a web. So I'll try and get the next speaker for the Constitution. That will be quite interesting. But I want the one that actually wants the old Constitution and the new Constitution for the next session.
Oh, and I'd like to say thanks to Dawn, because Dawn was the one who got me into doing this.
Fantastic. Yes, I hope she's all right, actually. Thank you so much.